The Business of Biotech is produced by Life Science Connect and its community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biopharma decision makers. If you're working on biologics process development and manufacturing challenges, you need to swing by bioprocessonline.com. If you're trying to stay ahead of the cell or gene therapy curve, visit cellandgene.com. When it's time to map out your clinical course, let clinicalleader.com help. And if optimizing outsourcing decisions is what you're after, check out outsourcepharma.com. We're Life Science Connect, and we're here to help. The Business of Biotech is not a sucker for a good DEI story. Let me explain that. I get the pitches pretty consistently. International Women's Day, Juneteenth, Women in STEM Day, Black History Month, Pride Month, and any number of other celebrations of underrepresented people seem to inspire PR agencies to pitch DEI stories to the media. In this business, it's almost always a story about a DEI-inspired biotech leader. Most of these pitches are garbage, and I realize they're garbage only because I've had a very small handful of conversations with biotech leaders who have actually been able to articulate on the value of DEI beyond the warm fuzzies elicited by an occasional female or minority C-suite hire. There's even a term for this garbage that I speak of. It's called diversity washing, a play on the term greenwashing, which was coined to characterize companies that spend more money marketing their brands as environmentally conscious than they spend actually reducing their carbon footprint. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and I'm going to get off this soapbox now because Rami Elghandour, my guest on today's show, is not a diversity washer. In fact, his novel cell therapy company, Arcellx, is killing it right now. Its stock topped $73 in March. Analysts are saying its lead phase 2 multiple myeloma asset will likely best BMS and J&J's therapies. And Rami doesn't have to fabricate anything to draw a direct line from point A, his rabid commitment to growing a diverse team, to point B, a biotech that's defying market trends, outperforming its peers, and growing rapidly. On today's show, we're pulling back the covers on that success, getting to know Rami and learning how he's building a company that's not just a colorful mosaic of humanity, but fitted out with the best minds in the business. Rami, how is that for a setup?
Couldn't be better, Matt. I really appreciate the passion with which you attack the topic. Obviously, I think you know quite a bit about it, and I've dug into a variety of companies approaching in a variety of ways. But yeah, excited to have this conversation and really appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate it as well. I'm honored to have you as a guest, and your Arcellx, as I said, is doing great right now. So I'm interested in digging into that. And before we get into the meat of the DEI conversation and start attacking those lines that I mentioned, I want to get to know you a little bit and what brought you to the business, what kind of forms your leadership style. And it looked to me on paper, and it's often wrong on paper. There's nuance to the story that I don't get looking at a LinkedIn profile. But it looked like you got into life sciences venture capital, like pretty much right on the heels of earning your MBA at Wharton, after doing some undergrad and early work experience in electrical and computer engineering, of all things. So I'm curious. It makes me curious about those formative years. What incited or inspired the pivot to biotech, and how you kind of got started?
Yeah, sure. I always make that joke that it makes a lot of sense that I'm running a biotech company given my experience in education and electrical engineering. But I think as we talk and think about cell therapy, there's such an operational and sort of almost like an engineering mindset component to this field that it would surprise most people that there's actually a pretty high degree of alignment between the practical experience I've developed and certainly the experience here at Arcellx, which, as you very graciously highlighted, has been incredible. But the pivot to biotech for me was a little bit more nuanced, I guess. After I had a great run at another startup that I was able to grow from about 30 to 1,000 people and take public, and had a lot of success in. And after taking some time off, I really wanted to think about how I wanted to spend my life, and I decided I wanted to spend it on something that changes the world in the next decade. And certainly cell and gene therapies was at the top of that list. AI was also near the top of that list. But That's what brought me to Arcellx. I was really interested in oncology and cell therapies more specifically. I was approached about the opportunity. The company had developed an early proof of concept, but certainly had a lot more opportunity ahead of it. And it was a really great fit for me in terms of the stage of development, the space I wanted to be in, some folks that I've worked with previously and knew and trusted. And as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to ask you a follow-up on that because a lot of our listeners are aspirational biotech leaders, aspirational biotech founders, and I make comment, I make reference to this frequently. I'm very often asked by aspirational biotech leaders, especially young ones, perhaps people who are in their undergrad or post-grad work who are interested in the space, like what should I do? Should I go get an MBA? Should I start out at the bench in the lab? Should I, join big bio, get experience? Like what are the likely what are the likely career paths? And having interviewed hundreds and hundreds of biotech founders and CEOs, I tell them like all of it, one of them, all of them, any of them, like people come from every background or walk of life. But folks who perhaps have a degree in a related but different field, or maybe come from a different industry, might wonder what some of the keys are to breaking down any barriers, even perceived, to getting into this space. So I'm curious, in your experience, when you decided you wanted to do something meaningful and take advantage of the cell and gene therapy activity that was happening, and you said, okay, I want to go, get involved with a biotech. Were there any real or perceived barriers to this guy who has good entrepreneurial skills and a good business background, making it into specifically bio?
Yeah, it's a great question. To be honest, I didn't really find a lot of resistance or barriers. And when making that transition, what I actually found was the complete opposite. I found a lot of really open-minded folks that could see the translation of my prior experience and the value it could bring to the biotech space. And it wasn't just people that I had previously worked with, as in the case of Arcellx, but a lot of people I met throughout the kind of evaluation process that I hadn't known before, and were pretty excited about my background and what I brought to the table. And so I think that, to answer maybe your more specific question, like in terms of advice, I think, look, I had a mentor early on in my life tell me that at the end of the day, if you do real impactful and valuable work, the results, they may not show up immediately, but they show up over time. And I felt like the experiences I had gathered certainly played out that way when I wanted to make this transition. So I think the best advice I can give anyone is to focus on collecting great experiences. I think too often, like you said, people get caught up into some formulaic thing, like I need to work for a big company or small company. I need to work in this function or that function. And, the reality is that the world is always changing and opportunities are never the same from one moment to the other. So I think you just need to pick the best opportunities with the best people that will help you generate the best experiences. And if you do that enough time, I think it both is incredibly fulfilling, as I've certainly experienced in my career, but also can lead to great opportunities.
Yeah. You just mentioned that you had, some support and didn't meet a whole lot of resistance. Yet you have told me in a separate conversation that so you joined Arcellx in 2021 as CEO, but you told me that some of your closest confidants at the time when you were making the decision advised you against taking that role. Share why.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a different question, Matt. For sure, people, I had I was fortunate to have a number of really attractive opportunities. And generally speaking, there was a couple of reasons people told me not to take this particular role. One, at that moment in time, there was a belief that from a technology perspective, that allogeneic CAR Ts would overtake autologous CAR Ts, which is where we play at Arcellx, is the autologous space. And so a lot of folks, particularly on the investing side and on the public buy side, felt that it wasn't a worthwhile investment of time because the runway wasn't super long. Secondarily, as it relates to the lead program here, which you alluded to has the potential to be best in class in myeloma, there was a belief that we were just too late to the party. There was too many other players that were too far ahead of us, and that wasn't really a clear path to success. And it turns out I felt like that wasn't, I thought in both cases the advice was misguided for reasons that I won't spend a lot of time explaining now. But that was the secondary reason. I think the third reason was, while the stage of development, like I said, for me was right, there was a lot of risks with the company. The fundraising environment wasn't great. There was a lot of challenges within the company at that point in time in terms of turnover and things of that nature. So it was kind of compounding. It was like the space you were in, even though I saw it as attractive, some folks didn't see that. The opportunity that you were pursuing as the lead, a lot of people felt was challenged. Again, I didn't believe that. And then the third component was the company itself was going through some challenges. And so when you put a challenging company into a challenging, indication in a challenging space, that stacked up to a lot of no's. But I think that's why, we're in these positions, right? You have to make hard calls, and you have to have the vision to see through some of these challenges, and that there can be a big opportunity on the other side. And, I have to say, I'm fortunate that turned out to be right.
Well, your response begs the question: what did you see? I mean, beyond the challenge that probably, an entrepreneurial minded fellow like you thirsts for, right? Embraces, wants to take on. Beyond that, what did you see that you could wrap your arms around to take a company that was facing some challenges in a very competitive market and turn it into what you've helped it, turn into?
Yeah, so let's touch on those three buckets. So from a autologous versus allogeneic space, one of the actual advantages was coming from being kind of an outsider and not necessarily drinking the Kool-Aid, because all I could do was look at the scientific evidence and the clinical data in front of me and make an unbiased evaluation. And the conclusion I came to in the autologous versus allogeneic debate was that I think autologous is going to win out. And I think that's proven now 3 years later. That's very clear as the case. Especially in these oncology indications. And so that was actually pretty clear to me. The BCMA one actually touches back on the question you asked earlier about my perceived background coming into biotech. Coming from a commercial background, I think I was able to see that the market opportunity was sufficiently large. Again, that some of these competitors weren't likely going to be as competitive as people thought. And there was enough of an opportunity for us at least to build a base case that we can build a meaningful business. Maybe at that time, and truthfully at that time, it would have been, presumptuous that you can get to best in class because we had only treated a handful of patients. But there was the ceiling of being best in class. That certainly wasn't taken off the table. But there was also a floor of like, look, we can make it to market, and we can take enough share to justify this as an investment. And in fact, arguably the first decision I made when I joined Arcellx was to reinvest and commit to the LEAP program, because that was a point of that was a significant point of debate. So I'd say those are primarily I think the things that I saw that were a little bit different. Certainly the operational things, while a challenge, and if you felt confident in the category and you felt confident in your position in that indication, you have to bet on yourself that you can manage the operational elements. I did feel really strongly that there was an incredible scientific core in the company. One of the things I say I'm most proud of is we've been able to retain all of those original scientists. We call them the Super Seven to this day, and obviously minus the founder who's departed, but the other core group is still there and helping us drive towards new indications. And so that part, I think, if I wasn't confident in that part, I should find something else to do. I certainly was confident in the operational element, but I also got confident in the strategic elements, if you will.
Yeah, very good. Within 6 months of joining the company as CEO, I'm just going to rattle off a couple of the accomplishments that happened in those early months. You received an IND for Acellx 001, secured a Series C. 6 months after that, you closed your IPO. You already mentioned the fact that when you joined the company in 21, you said markets weren't great, which is like perhaps the understatement of the year. Markets were in a tailspin. You close your IPO. Arcellx has been outperforming since then, as I noted in my rambling introduction. So tell us, I don't even know like how to form the question up in a concise way, but tell us, I guess, how those first 6-12 months and the actions that you and leadership took there to position the company have contributed to that outperformance that I mentioned.
Yeah, look, that's a great place to start. I would say that the actions fall into a couple of categories. There were certainly hard decisions that had to be made. Like you mentioned, one of them going public at that point in time. There were certainly enough folks that told me that was a really risky and dangerous thing to do given the state of the markets, but we were able to pull that off. There was an element of addressing the operational, challenges, and that really involved building a management team that can take the company to where it is today. And that a big element of that was diversity, as we'll get into. But I really fundamentally believe diversity is not just the right thing to do, but is a competitive advantage. And it's been foundational for me in the companies that I've been involved in. And certainly I would attribute to a large degree the success we've had to the incredibly diverse team that we were able to pull together here. So that was a big part of it too, and a big part of where we are today. And then the third one is execution. I mean, you can have the right kind of strategic vision and make hard decisions, and you can have the right people, but they say success is barred and the rent is due every day. You gotta just keep delivering, and I think that's one of the things we're most proud of is in a difficult backdrop, incredibly difficult, as you said. We've been able to do that now for 3 years, and I'm just going to keep the pedal down and keep it going.
Yeah. One of the other interesting, I guess, takeaways from the setup that I delivered is this idea that you're in a space that, you're shoulder to shoulder with companies like J&J and BMS and Eli Lilly and Novartis, just to name a couple. It's a who's who of big bio, and here Arcellx, mid-stage company, clinically, you're running with the big dogs, and as I said, many analysts have you guys pegged as the leader. Again, it's hard to develop a concise question, but it's like how and what's key? Like what are the, I guess, keys to running with that kind of company?
Yeah, I mean, like there's always back to like the question you asked earlier, where my advice was to kind of avoid generalizations. I think that sometimes there's this assumption that you're significantly advantaged across the board by being the larger incumbent, but that's not always the case. In our case, there's a couple of reasons to believe. I mean, beyond the team element that we talked about, and I'm sure we'll talk about more, but from a technology perspective, we feel like we have a stronger platform that allows us to differentiate across safety, efficacy, and scale manufacturability, which are critical in the cell therapy space. So that component obviously is really important, and we hope to continue to confirm that with future development and future studies. And then one thing you haven't touched on yet is our partnership with Kite Gilead. They are the leader in the space from a commercial and manufacturing perspective, which are both not to be understated in their importance in cell therapy. And so having a platform that allows you to potentially differentiate across safety, efficacy, and manufacturability, and then coupling that with the player with the biggest commercial footprint and the best track record of manufacturing scale and delivery does position us, we believe, to be the leader in the space over time.
Yeah. Was that Kite Gilead partnership in play or in process or developing when you joined the company, or is that something that's taken place since you came on board?
No, that certainly took place since I came on board, and as the data matured in our lead program. You have to again remember, when I first joined, there wasn't a lot of belief in another company being able to join this party, right? So there wasn't a lot of necessarily interest in this lead BCMA program. But over time, as we delivered more data, as we developed more relationships, as we built the company, developed confidence in the team and our ability to execute, certainly that level of interest grew.
Can you share any, I don't know, details or anecdotes around the establishment of that partnership and maybe what some of the keys were to making it happen?
Yeah, I mean, look, at some point, I think we had gotten the world's attention. I think the harder part was striking a deal that worked for us. And I would say that we had the mentality of making sure that whatever deal we execute, we were treated like a larger company, that we felt like we were equal in the partnership, because again, we had a lot of confidence in our team and what we brought to the table. And so I think the biggest challenge, whether it was with Kite Gilead or any other party, was negotiating a deal where we felt like we were going to have an equal seat at the table. That was also important strategically because we're building this company for the long term. And so for us, you want to develop these capabilities over time so that when you have hopefully additional hits in your pipeline, you're able to leverage those muscles to actually, bring the pipeline programs to market. So we didn't want to be a passenger. We wanted to be a co-pilot. And that, I would say, without getting into too much detail, was probably the hardest thing from a negotiations perspective.
Yeah. I had a conversation not long ago about negotiations with a negotiator, and we were talking about this concept where, like, you want $200 and I want to give you $100, and he said, so we settle on $150, and he said that leaves you not happy and me not happy. Like, there's so much more to the equation, right? Like, we want to come to a deal terms where it's not just meeting in the middle, but each of us walking away feeling as though we've accomplished an objective. And I can imagine that can be pretty tricky sometimes when you're going into negotiations with companies like that.
No, and that's exactly right. That's the exact right framework. And I feel like that is where we landed. I think ultimately, rather than sort of ticky-tacky going back on points, it's stepping back and seeing what the whole pie can look like and how we can grow it together and where our strengths lie and what we can each contribute. And look, the experience with the Kite Gilead team has been phenomenal. They're amazing partners. I think one of the things that is unique in our partnership is how aligned our teams are from the leadership across the board. Cindy Peretti's been an incredible leader. Our teams feel like truly like one team. And so it's not just that on paper we are able to negotiate this deal, but in practicality, we've been able to really execute it in a way where we feel like, we're all rowing in the same direction, which I think from your experience, Matt, that's hard enough to do within an individual company, let alone to do across two companies, one of which is a relatively larger company. So we couldn't be really more happy with how things have played out. But you needed that foundation of the negotiation as the basis. But I can tell you, even if we gave that paperwork to two companies and said, hey, this is your deal, it's actually a whole different ball wax to actually operationalize it in a way. And that's really a credit to Eileen Fernandez, our CBO. She was the lead on the deal, along with Miriam Abdul Karim, our general counsel. And then obviously we have a broader management team that has been driving it. But Eileen has played a huge role in making sure that this deal actually in function reflects what we set out to accomplish.
Rami, the name dropping that you're doing is just too beautiful a segue to resist to get into the DEI portion of this conversation. You just talked about people who are instrumental in deal making and execution, and I believe the names you rattled off were Cindy, Miriam, and Eileen, none of which sound like middle-aged white dudes.
No, they are not middle-aged white dudes. They're incredible leaders in their own right, irrespective of what their names might suggest. But obviously, they're very strong women as well.
When you I want to get into the meat of this conversation about your commitment to DEI and the value that it brings Arcellx. When you joined the company, you talked about the people being one of the differentiators that helped you turn the corner. You talked, was it the Super Seven?
That's right. Very good memory, man.
The Super Seven, the Super Seven scientists. When you sat back and you looked at the landscape of leadership and down, right? Leadership and through middle management and into the lab, whatever size the company was when you joined it. Were you immediately impressed with the diversity of perspectives and cultures, or were you more like, there's some room for improvement here?
Yeah, I would say mostly impressed. I felt like the broader company was fairly diverse, and one thing we didn't talk about is the company was predominantly in Maryland. I sit here in Northern California, and we now have a California office as well. The Maryland office has only grown since I've joined, but we've also grown a presence here. And so I would say like the company is only about 30 people, and it was mostly a scientific team. And I would say within that scientific team, the diversity was pretty strong. I would say even the management team was pretty good, but obviously there was always some room to grow and from there, and we've certainly done that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you were going to grow. You're 130 plus people now, so the growth was inevitable. And I want to get into some detail around how you make choices and decisions in that growth. But I guess the fundamental question that I don't want to just skip over is why. When you sat back and you looked and you're like, yeah, you know what, it's a team of brilliant minds, and they're brilliant minds who are diverse. That's important to me. Why?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get that question all the time. I think if I can go back a little bit, why is diversity so important to me? I think part of it is the experience I had growing up. I had a really strong mom, and she was an entrepreneur, and she kind of broke the mold in a lot of different ways. And so as I kind of reflect on it, I think a big part of my makeup is just not having instilled a bias where I didn't feel like women can't do incredible things entrepreneurially, leadership wise, and so on. And so I felt like that was pretty formative for me. But in my personal experiences, I'm pretty competitive and obsessive with winning. And so once I got into a position where I was hiring people, I just wanted to hire the best person. And so interestingly, I think the first 3 people I ever hired in my career were all women, not because I set out to hire women, but because I set out to hire the very best people. And what I found through that experience is that when you hire diverse leaders in particular, you don't have to have a lot of policies and bureaucracy to drive diversity. That example you set tends to propagate throughout the organization and sort of is self-realizing. So I would say, and I'm sure you probably want more, but the highest level, I think some combination of my formative experience and my professional experiences early on reinforce that diversity was a pathway to success. And that's only grown as time has passed.
Yeah. Did it start with sort of that, I guess, that formative experience, having a strong entrepreneurial mom, and then growing through your, through your schooling and your Wharton MBA and your early entrepreneurial experience, like sort of experience, anecdote, and intuition? And I asked that question because, like, I could, if I wanted to, I could jump on Google right now and I could pull up stats that point to, facts, right? Statistics that point to the value of multiple perspectives, multiple cultural and gender perspectives on a specific business. In our case, biotech, perhaps like, patient centricity. What's the value of having a diverse team when it comes to patient centricity? Different cultures, different genders receive and accept therapeutic opportunities in different ways. So like there are people who do research on this stuff, right? And maybe some of that came later. I'm just curious, like, if there came a point where you're like, I can kind of codify this this strong belief and intuition that I have, and I need to maybe or should.
No, I mean, look, now you're throwing the segues in my direction. I think that was the next evolution. And as you know, I have a TEDx talk on the topic, but somewhere around 2016 or thereabouts, I just happened to read a lot of research on this topic. And to use your word, I kind of codified it into a talk that I just used internally within my last company, which is, here's my perspective on diversity. I think it's worked really well experientially, but here's the research that backs up all this experiential stuff and why we should be leaning into it. And that's where I got the actual nudge from my teammates to say, hey, we'd really love to share this talk with our friends and our families. And so when I had time a couple of years later, I actually did it as a TEDx talk so that it can be shared kind of more broadly. But yeah, there's a ton of research that organizations with women on their boards tend to outperform across nearly every financial metric. Even papers written by diverse authors, and in this case, it's more ethnic diversity, tend to outperform from an impact factor and citation perspective. So we can certainly get into all of that, but there is no shortage of research that backs us up. So I would say, yeah, I think the sort of flow is that I think this was certainly informed by my formative years. It developed through intuition and experience professionally, and then it was cemented through research that really mirrored and supported those first two positions. And now I'm in much more of a position to, I don't know if evangelize is the right word, but certainly to be pretty vocal about it amongst other topics, because I do really believe that it is beyond the right thing to do. It is a massive competitive advantage, particularly as it relates to gender equity. And it's something that not enough companies take advantage of. And in fact, I get called from companies big and small to talk on the topic, to consult on helping, figure out how they can improve their diversity and their retention. And so it's something I've been pretty passionate about and certainly invested a lot of effort into.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a few follow-ups on that. I'm going to start with a comment that you made earlier around that kind of alluded to building the concept and executing on the concept into the culture of the company without doing it in sort of an overt way. I mean, you can, if you wanted to, you could have Tuesday talks, right? You could do workshops, right? Like you could bring consultants in and maybe that's fine. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's a great starting point for companies who are not as convicted on the concept perhaps as Arcellx is. But the way you paint it, it's more of a story of just naturally sort of weaving the acceptance and belief in this into the culture. And I'm curious, like, without a roadmap, how that happens. Does it begin to happen at the board and C-suite level and just sort of matriculate, through the management and down levels? Like, what's sort of the, I don't know. I don't know if I'm asking.
How does the magic happen?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm asking for a formula, or, I mean, there's got to be obviously reinforcement and there's got to be some degree of formality.
Yeah, I would say it is. I think your intuition is right. It is a bit of a mix. I think there's an element of, because it is a topic that is important to me, I probably, without realizing it, talk about it more than most, right? And it is not in a forced way, like you're saying, in terms of like, holding talks about it or so on, but we'll be in a debrief. We'll have interviewed, say, and this is a real example, two finalist candidates, a male and a female, and we'll go through the debrief and I'll hear things like the male candidate has more technical experience or they have more of this or more of that. And I'll look at the resumes and say, curiously, it seems like the female candidate actually has more technical experience. So why do we think we're saying that? Is that a bias that we're expressing through the interview process? And so, by being informed enough, particularly as the leader in the organization, to sort of bring these topics up when they come up, right? Again, not in a forced way, but in an organic way. I think that's one thing that opens people's eyes. It's educational and it helps us make better decisions. Also, it's important to me in the sense that I don't look at any just individual role. I look at the composition of our management team. And so there are some points where I've said, look, I'd really like to get a woman in this particular role. Now, if you, I don't know if you're familiar, I used this joke recently because I had a trip to Costa Rica where I learned about this wonderful creature called the Jesus Christ lizard. Are you familiar with the Jesus Christ lizard?
I'm not.
It is called the Jesus Christ lizard because it literally runs on water. And so this is going to get into a deeper point that is really important. So I will say to the recruiter, look, my goal or desire is to get a woman in this role. Now, if you get a man that is a Jesus Christ lizard, that I will happily interview them. But what I interestingly find, because you brought up DEI, and it's one of these things that is infuriatingly under attack for reasons that have nothing to do with DEI, in my opinion. But one of the core arguments against DEI is we have to lower the bar to actually hire diverse people, when in fact, we actually need to maintain the bar. Because what actually happens, in my experience, is that if you are no offense to you, Matt, you're a great guy, but if you are a middle-aged white guy, you are more likely to get a job, not because you're exceptional, but because of the virtue of privilege over time accumulating to that you have gotten experience that maybe have put you in better positions, even though you're not bad, but you're maybe not the most exceptional candidate. So what I say is, like, let's actually keep the bar high across the board, right? We're only going to hire exceptional people. And by doing that, I've actually found that I've hired a fairly diverse team rather than this conception that we're lowering the bar for diverse folks. Because in fact, diverse people generally have to outperform in order to get the role, right? They have to really stand out to overcome the bias, to overcome the lack of privilege, to overcome the limitations that they often face. So to the point where they're getting into these leadership positions and conversations, they're actually quite exceptional. So what I say is, like, let's keep the bar high, right? Let's keep it high for both candidates, and let's see who can actually clear that bar. And look, I've obviously hired all sorts of folks, including white folks, brown folks, black folks, diverse, religiously diverse, ethnically, American, not American. And so I found that just keeping the bar high, you actually get a fairly diverse team across the board without actually having to necessarily prescribe it. I'll get off my soapbox, but this is I think, a really important point.
Rami, when you leaned forward and started using your hands, I was thinking, oh, now we're getting into the good stuff. No, you get on the soapbox and stay there. It makes me curious, though, when you talk about maintaining the bar height, looking for exceptional first and foremost. It begs the question around supply, right? Like, are you creating challenges? Is it more challenging for you? Are you creating challenges that perhaps cause some friction or pushback with your shareholders around saying, okay, like, we're going to maintain the bar. Exceptional is requirement number one. Requirement number 1.25 is diversity, perhaps, right? We're gonna make that a goal. Is the perception that the supply of female, as an example, or minority, as an example, pick minority, is the perception that the supply of those people into this business with the technical capacities to be exceptional, that supply is low, right? Like, you go back to what's going on in grade school and high school and college to encourage STEM, in the female population, that not being enough to maintain supply of exceptionalism in female and minority candidates.
What's interesting is that if your bar is exceptional, these searches are going to take time anyway. Now, people will perceive, hey, it's taking time because you're also trying to get a woman. But the reality is that if you're trying to get exceptional people, that always takes time. I would say that, one, the results are there. So I think the system works, right? Like, if you do hire exceptional people, you get diverse people, and those diverse people lead to better results. So I think it depends on what people's time frame is. If your time frame is you're in it for the long term and you want long-term growth and success, it's worth that. To me, it's worth the investment in time. The other thing is you have to be prepared to counter the bias that is intrinsic in this particular thread, which is that I'll meet with a recruiter and say what I said earlier, like, listen, I would love to really hire a woman or a minority or whatever it is in this particular role. And they will say, well, that's going to be hard because the pool is constrained. And I'll say, well, I've already done a search and there are X number of people that I found myself that fit that mold. And so, it's not impossible, right? We can agree it's not impossible. It's going to be harder, but that's why you got to earn your paycheck, right? If you're not willing to do that, then it's like, what am I hiring you for? Because I can find regular people that are close to the office myself. So I think it does take a little bit of, maybe a little bit of more legwork, a little bit more of challenging, a little bit more holding people accountable. But I would say the results are well worth it.
Yeah. Curious about the impact of that commitment on sort of the organizational build out, like a biotech. There are trends in terms of hiring certain positions at certain points in the timeline, whether it's clinical timeline, development timeline, whatever. Like you get to a point where like we're going to need a regulatory expert, we're going to need a legal expert very early on. Later in the game, we're going to need commercial expertise, market expertise. So you need to time that correctly in correlation with your timeline. It sounds to me like perhaps there's got to be at least some conscious proactivity at Arcellx around, we may be signing ourselves up for a protracted recruiting phase here for this particular candidate. Do you have to be conscious of that and work that into sort of the hiring cadence calculus?
It's funny. It's just not even something we think about or has had any kind of impact. I'll tell you where it's most acute is when in your leadership hires. Like I think it took me about a year to hire my CFO, who I really was focused on hiring an exceptional, diverse person. But in a position like that, it's well worth it, right? If it takes you an extra 2 or 3 months or whatever it is, like if you do a search like that and you really want someone exceptional, it's going to take some time anyhow, just based on availability of people and number of people who are qualified and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of the day-to-day of like filling this role or that role, it's really not, it's not come up as an issue at all or a consideration. Part of it is like, if you're going to do this, you really need to build like an exceptional talent organization. And it won't surprise you, but that's also led by a woman, Michelle Greer, who is exceptional, our head of talent. I think you build for it. Like what you can't say is, look, I want exceptional people and I want them to be diverse ideally, but I'm not willing to invest in having exceptional talent people. I'm not willing to invest in having an exceptional management team that helps draw out that talent. I'm not willing to invest my own personal time in doing that. I'm not willing to invest in the resources of maybe paying for the search firm to do it. I think that's the challenge. If people, this is a deeper conversation about strategy, but one of the core, if you go read Michael Porter or you study strategy, one of the core concepts of strategy is fit, right? Even if you have a bunch of activities that you're good at, but they don't really fit together, you're not likely to realize a lot of success. So in this same sort of vein, like you can't just take an organization that is ill fit for diversity, and we should talk about inclusion too, because that's the other core element, and just say, look, we've decided tomorrow to hire a diverse team. But if your organization isn't uniformly exceptional, you don't have a strong talent team, and your management team isn't diverse, that a diverse person will want to join that team, then you're not likely just by making a decision to suddenly transform the organization. It's like the whole organization has to be purpose built to do this. And if it is, then it's really like, it's not something we honestly think about, right? It just happens organically and we meet our timelines and our growth, and it's just great.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. You mentioned earlier also that, you use the words massive competitive advantage in relation to the diversity that's on display at Arcellx. How do you know?
I mean, look, I think the proof is in the pudding, as they say, Matt. I think you have been remarkably generous in your description of what we've been able to accomplish. And this isn't my first rodeo. We've been able to do this at least twice now, where I've seen the direct results of these incredible people really kind of change the business and change the world. And so that's on the macro level. I think the results are evident. I mean, it's clear that I'm not doing everything myself here. We've got a great team that's doing a lot, and I mentioned some of those folks already. But I would say on a more micro basis, you mentioned this earlier, but I will tell you the interactions within the company and even across teams are so much better and different because of the diversity we have. I would say that because the management team in particular is diverse, the policies and everything, the decisions you make create a more inclusive and inviting environment that allow us to also then build on that and hire more diverse, exceptional people across the board. So I would say you can see it in the results, you can feel it in the environment. I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about is both how incredibly diverse Arcellx is, but also like how much recognition we've gotten for that and how much recognition historically my organizations have gotten for that. It's not just even the business performance, but it's the environment that you create, the joy people take in their work, and how much that influences your ability to continue to get more and more exceptional talent.
Inclusion. You said, we haven't really dug into inclusion a little bit. Boy, we're gonna. I don't know how much time we have this afternoon, Rami, but we could go long on this. But I am curious about the inclusion thing. You and I have had off-camera conversations about the polarity of American, socio-political affairs right now. What do they say? Two things you never talk about at work: religion and politics. It's sort of unavoidable right now. You talked about how Arcellx is a melting pot of religious beliefs. How do you manage that? Like, how does that relate to inclusion? First of all, like maybe share with us what inclusion means to you, and then share with us a little bit of how you manage for inclusion, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah. I think inclusion, and the reason I bring it up is that it is one of the things I feel like is not talked about enough. There's such a focus on diversity, but putting a bunch of diverse people into a company where they don't feel like they can, they're part of the fabric of the organization, they can ascend and grow, that they can be who they are and bring their whole selves to work, is not really that effective. So one of the pieces of research I cite in my talk is that there's one particular organization where, somewhere around 40% of the entry-level workforce was female, but only like 20% or so of the top layers of the organization were female. And why is there that drop-off? And one of the theses that was tested there was that, women opt out, or their behavior or whatnot kind of drives that differential. But upon research and inspection, it turns out that the behaviors of women, from participating in meetings, from who they spoke to, for how they communicated, where they communicated, all those kind of things, were equivalent to men. And so really it was the bias that was holding them back from advancing, not their behavior or their performance. And so I think that's where inclusion is really critical. It's not just enough that you have diverse people, but you have to have an environment where those diverse people can do what they do every day. So that's a little bit different than I think the question you're asking. The point I was trying to make was that if you don't, and the best way to drive inclusion is to really have a diverse management team where people have a seat at the ultimate table. Because what I see a lot when I get calls from organizations to help with diversity, it's help us. And I'll go on their website and look at their management team. And what you said earlier, the whole management team is middle-aged white guys. Mm-hmm. And so how are you expected to foster an environment where a diverse group of people can grow if you don't have that representation right at the top, that inclusion right at the top? Like it's unlikely that group of people is going to come up with a great maternity policy. to be honest, right? It's just unlikely. It's unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely that their programs or health insurance, all these different things are going to be responsive to an increasingly diverse workforce. And I think that's what's challenging is that it's just, and it reinforces the point we just talked about. It's just not a light switch. It's not something you can just do in isolation. You have to be committed to it. And the only way to be committed to the very first question you asked is to actually believe it. And you believe that through experience through research, right? That reinforces that this is something really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, we're going long here. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Discussion? Yeah. All right. Good stuff. We've also acknowledged that the DEI concept has fallen out of favor with some, was never in favor for some, and you don't do business in a vacuum. You contract with outsourced, perhaps outsourced manufacturers, development people, suppliers, big pharma. Where, like, I guess the question would be, if you were going to get it, we'll frame it this way. If you were going to give advice to someone who, wanted to embrace this commitment, recognizes the value and is ready to take the next step, but you had perhaps a warning, not a warning like, hey, to dissuade, but a warning like, hey, you're going to take some incoming, right? There might be some incoming here. You might create some friction or challenge for yourself in some relationship with a shareholder, as I said, supplier, outsourced manufacturer, whatever it might be. Have you seen any of that, and what advice might you offer to prepare for and perhaps mitigate any of that friction that you might encounter?
Yeah, I mean, I think on DEI, it's a bit too soon. I know that like that word has been weaponized, for lack of a better term, of late. And I don't know that I've seen kind of the fallout from it yet to say that I've seen, aside from obviously it was used to help oust some university presidents or in conjunction with that. But I haven't seen it practically, certainly in biotech or more broadly. I do think, that probably if you were inclined to say you listened to this podcast or read something and you're like, hey, I really believe in this, I want to enact it, you probably are thinking, well, this has become a bit more of an explosive word, and should I be worried? I'm not sure there's much to worry about there. I think that it's been more in high stakes politics than in sort of the day-to-day life of what we deal with in terms of what we do. I would also say that it is increasingly clear that from an ESG perspective, that shareholders do care about diversity. It's something that is getting more and more attention over time. So I would sort of ignore the bluster of what is happening in this moment in time and focus on the fact that, again, it is a competitive advantage. It is the right thing to do. And I think it's with the grain of where, companies are going and where funds and shareholders are going to care, even if at this moment in time, it's a little bit challenged. And I'm a big fan of doing the right thing, over the arc of the long term, even if it's a bit unpopular at any point in time.
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, I mean, I interview a lot of leaders of biotech, hundreds and hundreds so far, hundreds and hundreds to go. And I take a lot of pitches, right, from PR and communications agencies. And the first thing that I do when I receive a pitch is I go to the company's website. One, I determine that they're a fit from a product and technology standpoint. And then two, my friend Alan Shaw, who's a frequent guest on the show, always talks about betting on jockeys, not horses. So I go look at the jockeys. I go to the About Us, the leader profile page, and it's anecdotal. I don't sit there with a tick sheet, but in biotech and in small biotech, there are a lot of companies that are as vanilla as they possibly could be. If some of those leaders were exposed to this concept in a meaningful way and warmed up to the concept, warmed up to the idea, but perhaps lacked the conviction that you were more or less born with, or the education that you've acquired along the way that many of us have. Where would be a good starting point? Well, I mean, we'll start with you. Maybe we'll point to your TED Talk for
Yeah, that's a good starting point.
Is that still available, like on YouTube? Can people
Yes,
in our
it's
audience?
on YouTube and it's on TED.com. So you can easily, if you Google me and TED Talk, you'll find it. So that is a good starting point, not just because I gave it, but because it is very heavily referenced and it covers sort of the gamut of like why this is important professionally and what's the underlying science too, that even if you have kids or have children, that's important. But I would say besides the inclusion point we touched on, the other really important point in that talk is that it's important to actually address both men and women when talking about this topic. I think there's an intrinsic sort of bias or belief that this is a male issue, that we have to overcome the biases on our male friends and colleagues. But I can't tell you how many times I've given that talk to a live audience and the gasps you hear from women at certain parts in the talk, because they themselves don't appreciate how much this bias has infiltrated their thinking and their viewpoint on certain issues. And so I think and maybe that's a good point to make, which is that if you particularly are a male leader and you feel like this is a topic that is important, besides watching a TED Talk, is engage with some colleagues, particularly female colleagues, and say, hey, I'm interested in learning more. I want to hear more about your experience and what that's been like. And maybe we can, from that experience, start to make some steps, right? Address some of these things so other women don't have to face. I'm focusing on gender equity, but obviously this is broadly true of diversity as well.
Yeah.
But I think just starting dialogues lead to connections lead to bigger networks of support, bigger education, and ultimately enough conviction to make a difference.
Yeah, very good. What on this topic, specific to this topic, DEI, what haven't I asked you that perhaps I should have, or what have I maybe glossed over that you'd like to hit on?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like we covered a lot. I would say that maybe one thought is that it's hard to do this if you're not authentic. Like it's hard to, I like the actual, although I didn't see it coming, but it was a very great intro that you had, and the diversity washing, as you called it. I hadn't heard that term before, but it's hard to do this if you're disingenuous. And it's a little bit, to use my electrical engineering degree here, it's a bit binary, right? Like you can't be sort of halfway a little bit. It's like you either really believe this is important and you're going to kind of follow through on it from a diversity perspective, from an inclusion perspective, from holding the bar high across the board and making sure that you are committed. And you're going to be authentic to yourself. I think we talked about this before. I'm the kind of person where this isn't the only topic I talk about. I tend to talk, I talk about everything from abortion to Palestine to Black Lives Matter to, I think you have to be yourself. Like you have to be authentic. You have to believe in what you believe in. And people will really, I don't like using the word follow, but it certainly resonates with people. And even if you don't have the same point of view on something, that's okay. Like it's important to be respectful. It's important to say, I respect that you can have a different opinion from me on this topic, even if it's a really emotional and controversial or challenging topic. That's okay, because, there was a song way back when I was in high school where there was this it was perfect because it was like graduation year, and there was this monologue where this guy was kind of giving life lessons to the background of this music. And one of the things that always stuck me was that something along the lines of like, life is a race, but you're only racing against yourself. Just because someone doesn't agree with you today doesn't mean they may not see your point of view tomorrow, or you may not see their point of view tomorrow, right? So I think people need to, if there's anything I've learned, is that you need to give yourself grace and give other people grace. Sometimes it's okay if someone takes a little bit longer to maybe appreciate your point of view, or you take a little bit longer and rethink it, appreciate their point of view. But time is a magical thing, and something that not enough people take advantage of. Might be to get a better candidate, but it also might be to learn a more valuable lesson or perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very sound. I think I remember that song that you're referencing.
Yeah, I
I
have to
don't
look it
remember
up.
I don't remember the artist or the title, but I'm hearing it in my head as you're talking about
Yeah.
it. All right, that's fantastic. I've really appreciated this conversation. I mean, I think it's super insightful, very enlightening. Appreciate your perspectives. It's interesting, if you're a listener and you're at this point in the podcast listening and you're like, yeah, but what about Arcellx? I didn't hear like the next steps for the pipeline. I just disclaimer, Rami told me in a previous conversation, it's okay if we don't commercial, they make this a commercial for Arcellx. And this the company the profile of the company is such that if you're really interested in that, you can spend 20 minutes on Google and you're going to have a whole bunch of information. But I do want to touch on that real quick before we wrap things up here, Rami. I am interested in what from a leadership perspective is your kind of next highest priority at Arcellx.
Sure. Yeah. Look, we're in an incredible point in time here where I feel like we've obviously accomplished a lot to what you shared earlier, Matt, but we have so much road ahead of us. So we're in the middle of running our phase 2 pivotal study in multiple myeloma. And so we're excited about that study and its potential. And we've guided to being on the market in 2026. And so that's something that, as we gear up over the next couple of years here, it's going to be a really fun ride scaling this organization for commercialization and ultimately delivering this therapy more broadly at scale. And so that's kind of the high level on the lead program. There are other studies and earlier lines and all sorts of things that we're working on. But for, the teaser for your audience, if you will, is that. And then obviously we're also equally excited about our pipeline. We have a really differentiated technology, which we didn't get into for the reasons that you and I mentioned, which is that we're very passionate about talking about other things. Mm-hmm. But people can certainly read up on that. And we have a study in AML that's in phase 1 right now. We're excited about and hoping to bring some solid tumor targets to the clinic in the next couple of years. So all in all, just super fun company to be a part of. We're always obviously growing and recruiting. So if I'll put a commercial for anything, is if you're interested in what you heard, look us up, and if there's a role, hit us up. And we're always, we've got a lot of amazing people here, a lot of wood to chop in the next couple of years to continue to build this company into what we believe can be the first scale profitable company in the cell therapy space, and certainly help a lot of people and save a lot of lives.
Awesome. If you're interested in getting in touch with Arcellx regarding employment, just do a right angle check on your exceptionalism before you apply. And to be honest, like I would love to have you back on the show another time to talk about a little bit more about what the company's doing. Though I strongly suspect that if we attempted to do that, we'd probably run down a rabbit hole around some sort of social issue anyway. So, but I would welcome you back. I know it's a lot to cover in an hour, and there's much more to be said. So hopefully someday down the road you'll be game for coming back on for a part 2. But in the meantime, again, insightful, instructive, inspiring. I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate your transparency with our audience.
No, it's my pleasure, Matt, and I would love to come back on one condition, that we go down the rabbit hole for sure. I get a lot of opportunities to talk about Arcellx. It's much more fun talking about these very important and impactful things.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, well, you pick the rabbit hole and give me a date, and we'll run down it.
That sounds like a plan.
Thank you, Rami.
My pleasure.
So that's Arcellx Chairman and CEO Rami Elghandour. I'm Matt Pillar, and you just listened to the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Life Science Connect and its community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for all manner of life science professionals. I invite you to subscribe to the Business of Biotech podcast anywhere you listen. Leave us feedback and a review. And be sure to subscribe to our monthly newsletter at bioprocessonline.com/BOB. In the meantime, thanks for listening.